Good afternoon, and welcome to the American Women's History Initiative's 2020 Symposium, American Women of Science, Recovering History, Defining the Future. I'm your host, Jennifer Schneider, Program Manager for the American Women's History Initiative. I think I speak for all of us when I say that we are so glad you could join us for an afternoon of truly unique sessions. The American Women's History Initiative, because of her story, is an ambitious undertaking to research, collect, document, display, and share the compelling story of women. We believe that by telling a more complete, nuanced history, we can better understand our nation's past. Our yearly symposium series is a part of our larger efforts to share American women's history. Today, we'll explore a small piece of the history of women in science. While we can't possibly cover everything, we intend for today to serve as a reflection on some of the challenges and triumphs that women scientists have faced throughout the centuries. Before we begin the symposium, I'm going to go through a few details about how this will all work. First, we are recording this session, and the recording will be made available afterwards to all members. We're also offering live closed captioning of this event, which you can enable on the bottom bar. This program is being conducted in listen and view only mode, which means your audio is muted and cameras are disabled. A brief rundown of this afternoon's schedule. First, we'll hear from our symposium co-chairs, Dr. Elizabeth Harmon and Dr. Katrina Pagan-Lohan. Next, we'll hear from Stephanie Stevish, the Margaret and Terry Stent Director at the Smithsonian American Art Museum and co-chair of the American Women's History Initiative. Followed by Dr. Eva Pell, who will give a keynote on her path to becoming Smithsonian Undersecretary for Science. Then we'll learn how women historically gained entry into STEM fields with Dr. Pam Henson, Dr. Peggy Kidwell, and Dr. Sally Kolstedt. And we'll finish our day with a panel conversation about the double bind with Dr. Shirley Malcom. Throughout these 2 weeks, please feel free to share your thoughts with us on social media using hashtag #BecauseOfHerStory. I'm thrilled to hand it over to our co-chairs for this symposium, Dr. Elizabeth Harmon and Dr. Katrina Pagan-Lohan.
We are thrilled to welcome you to this year's Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative Symposium. Thank you for joining us. My symposium co-chair, Dr. Katrina Lohan, and I have joined forces as a scientist and a historian to create a program that addresses the past, present, and future of women in science. Understanding the past and present challenges women in science have faced is more important than ever. The ongoing pandemic has exacerbated gender inequities at home and the workplace. We urgently need to draw attention to these disparities and create solutions to support and keep women in the workforce. While the career costs related to COVID-19 impact all women, they are most severe for women of color. In our program, we have tried to address all of these issues and more with the hope that this symposium is an opportunity to learn about the historical and ongoing issues that impact women in science, and to provide a platform to continue the search for solutions that will help shape the future we want. We look to the past not for a roadmap, but to understand how institutions and policymakers have created some of the challenges we face today, but also how they have helped create solutions we can implement. We also look to museum collections and archival records to identify gaps in our understanding of the historical accomplishments of women in science. The Smithsonian is a special place to do this work because it's one of the United States' oldest national museums and oldest scientific institutions. By my count, well over 500 women have worked in the sciences at the Smithsonian since the late 19th century, and that's a total number. It's important to note that it hasn't been a story of more women joining each decade. Across the 20th century, there were periods of contraction. It took until the end of the 1950s for that total number to creep upwards towards 100. And it wasn't until after the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, as well as an expansion of the Smithsonian Institution in general, that that number really started to go up more quickly. And by 2000, there have been well over 300 women in the sciences. And that's across Smithsonian museums and research centers, like the National Museum of Natural History, the Astrophysical Observatory, the National Zoo and the Conservation Biology Institute, and later the National Air and Space Museum, the Environmental Research Center, the Tropical Research Institute, and the Museum Conservation Institute. I just wanted to get all of those in. Throughout the next couple weeks, you will have the chance to hear from some of the researchers who have spent decades working in the sciences at the Smithsonian, and many who have worked in science education and history. We've also reached out to colleagues at major academic institutions and science institutions. I'm going to hand things over now to Katrina, who will finish things off.
Thank you, Liz. Through the symposium, we also address the many issues that women in science face today, including pay inequity, lack of recognition, discrimination, and sexual harassment. While the number of women receiving degrees in STEM fields has been increasing over time, many of those women do not remain or advance in STEM careers, resulting in a paucity of women leaders in science. This lack of female leadership in the sciences is even apparent at our own Smithsonian institution, where male directors dominate at the science units, and only 1 of 6 of those directors is a female. According to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, only 30% of scientific researchers in the world are women. The ongoing struggles of female scientists can be seen out there on Twitter, with courageous individuals speaking out about their experiences of sexism and racism by tagging with #distractingly_sexy, #STEM2, and #Black in the Ivory. At the same time, we see a continued focus on finding solutions to these issues, with organizations like the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine currently conducting a study to determine the impact of COVID-19 on the careers of women in the academic sciences. And even with ongoing Twitter campaigns to highlight the essential research of BIPOC scientists, which started with Black Birders Week and has continued through organized efforts such as #Black in Microbiome and #Black in Chemistry, just to name a few. For the first time this year, 2 women were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the first time ever. We hope this symposium will highlight both the struggles and the achievements of women in science across the scientific disciplines, from illustrators to biologists to astrophysicists. While my co-chair, Dr. Liz Harmon, and I are on screen right now, a symposium like this does not happen with just 2 people. There were many folks who were instrumental in making the symposium happen, and we owe them a huge, genuine, heartfelt thank you. So first and foremost, we have to say thank you so much to Jennifer Nenschneider, the program manager for the American Women's History Initiative at the Smithsonian Institution. Without her, absolutely none of this would have been possible. We also owe a huge thank you to the American Women's History Initiative's Symposium Committee, who helped Liz and I comb through a large number of proposals. It consisted of 15 individuals from 11 Smithsonian museums and research units. We owe another debt of gratitude to Azine Rafi and Nicole Camarelli from the Smithsonian Office of Special Events and Protocol, who have also helped with so many of the logistics that I had no idea were even ongoing issues putting on something like this. We owe a huge shout out to all of our speakers and the MCs, the Smithsonian's Office of Public Affairs, and finally, a special thank you to the Office of Communications and External Affairs, especially Sarah Cohen, for helping us get out the word about this symposium through all of the different communication mechanisms that we have. Thank you so much for joining us for this symposium. We hope the programming over the coming days is both enjoyable and challenges you to envision a more diverse and equitable scientific workforce.
Thank you so much, Liz and Katrina, for your warm welcome. We'll now hear from Stephanie Stevish, the Margaret and Terry Stent Director of the Smithsonian American Art Museum and co-chair of the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Stevish, the Margaret and Terry Stent Director of the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the Renwick Gallery. I wear another hat as co-chair of the American Women's History Initiative. And in that role, I welcome you to our second annual symposium titled American Women of Science, Recovering History, Defining the Future. Just as young girls know the pioneering Polish and French scientist Marie Curie, we want them to know of pioneering American women in science, such as Maria Mitchell, who in 1848 was the first woman elected to join the American Academy of Arts and Sciences for her pioneering work in identifying a new comet the year before. The American Women's History Initiative is a commitment from the Smithsonian to the nation to make known the unknown and untold stories of American women. Our guiding star is a vision of an American society where gender inequity is eradicated, where the role of women in history is well known, accurate, acknowledged, and empowering for all citizens. And to this end, the Smithsonian American Women Initiative has accomplished the following. We've hired 9 curators to focus on researching, collecting, and displaying women's history drawn from the remarkable holdings of the Smithsonian. We've hosted a summer cohort, an internship program focused on undergraduate students interested in women's history. We've worked with our Smithsonian museums to acquire new collections, create new digital projects, public programs, and educational materials, as well as develop new dynamic exhibitions related to women's history. And here we are, hosting the second of a 5-year series of symposia to better tell the stories of American women. This year's symposium, American Women of Science, has 3 goals. First, to recover those lesser-known histories of women in science. Second, to share current research and programming breakthroughs. And third, to discuss opportunities to define a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive future. This symposium seeks to inspire and educate scientists as well as museum professionals. And we are looking always to support women in the work they're doing today in the sciences. Given the Smithsonian's long history and growth into the 20th century and 21st century as a place of 19 museums and 9 research centers, our past and present provide a unique opportunity for both internal reflection and external comparisons regarding the history of women in science. I very much hope you'll enjoy the sessions and workshops over the next 2 weeks. I welcome you again, and I invite you to sit up straight and get ready for what promises to be dynamic, fascinating, and in many ways, groundbreaking presentations ahead.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. We'll now hear from Dr. Eva Pell about her journey to become Smithsonian Undersecretary for Science. Dr. Pell?
Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. I really want to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm very humbled to give this address. My only regret is that I can't be doing this in person and have a chance to give a bunch of you who I know so well hugs. So just accept them virtually. I've given a few talks on women in science over the years, and one I particularly enjoyed delivering was at La Universidad de Talca in Chile in 2012, where I was, because I went with Charles Alcock to work on some giant Magellan telescope projects that were going on down there. When I was putting the talk together on the history of women, and I framed it around women in science in the Smithsonian, I relied heavily on some of the work compiled by the incomparable archivist Pamela Henson, who was kind enough to share with me some of her insightful papers. I understand she's going to be in a panel later on, and you're really in for a big treat, and I'm not going to steal her thunder. What I did learn in researching the subject was that our foremothers here at the Smithsonian were strong and independent women who faced adversities which eclipsed anything that any of us could imagine experiencing. My own career got started when I began graduate school in 1968. That was just 5 years after the death of Mary Agnes Chase, who was a botanist of incomparable tenacity, who worked at the Smithsonian for some 50 odd years. And it's on the shoulders of women like her that all of us stand today. For myself, as the daughter of a Holocaust survivors, I was the first in my family to go to college. And I had really had very little idea of what a career really looked like when I started graduate school. I knew I wanted to go into some aspect of agricultural science and that it would be plant related. I did not care for the color of red. Plant pathology had an appeal, but again, I didn't really know what that entailed. I received a departmental assistantship from Rutgers University, and in the early days, I met with various faculty members. While they were all pleasant enough, it was not until I entered Eileen Brennan's lab that I first encountered a scientist who absolutely burned with enthusiasm. After a few conversations, she had me in the greenhouse growing plants and starting my first experiments. She challenged me every day. Eva, why did you use that pH? Eva, why did you sample at those intervals? What do you think this means? She questioned me all the time, but she never questioned my expectation for building a career. I was aware that the men in the department had a little trouble figuring me out. I was only 20 years old when I started graduate school, and I had laser focus already. They couldn't relate to me except maybe as a surrogate daughter, and I don't think they really wanted to see their daughters doing what I was. But because I had Eileen Brennan as a buffer, I missed the skepticism of a girl with goals. I first encountered the real world when I went to work as an assistant professor at Penn State in 1973. I was so excited. I had hit the jackpot. An excellent department of plant pathology, a position to study the physiology and biochemistry of air pollution effects on vegetation, exactly what I wanted to do. This was going to be great. And it was. But what an eye-opening couple of years those first years were. The department had no women faculty. In fact, the College of Agriculture in which the department sat had only one faculty member who was in the research and teaching line. She was in rural sociology. I didn't meet her until I'd been at the university for 5 years. I was put in a lab on the outskirts of campus because there was no more space in the main building. Every faculty meeting felt awkward. The men didn't know what to make of me. Should they stand up when I came in? Should they stop their private conversations? They hunted together. They played cards. They went out for drinks after work. I wasn't included in those socialization activities. I wouldn't say I was excluded deliberately. They just never thought of me. But once again, a mentor stepped in, this time a man. His name was Sam Smith, and he was a virologist. His labs were adjacent to mine in this outpost, and for whatever reason, he decided to champion this underdog. Sam was ambitious. Every day, the men, that is to say, the faculty in the department, had coffee together at 9:30 in the main building. Sam would insist that we go. He said he would drive, and if we stayed too long and got a parking ticket, it would be his problem. He told me that I had to get known within the department. A few years later, he became my department head and later on my dean. Every step of the way, he ensured that I served on important committees and gained visibility. He understood that doing quality work was essential for success, but it was not sufficient, and he wasn't letting me off the hook. One of the amusing things that happened, at least amusing in the rearview mirror, were people's reactions when they first met me. My predecessor was a man named Al Wood. He eclipsed the room every time he walked in. Huge personality, real presence. When calls would come into my lab, I would answer research C, there would typically be this pregnant pause. Speaking, I would say. Oh, I'm sorry, I got confused in what I wanted to say to you. The phone would ring, I would answer it. I would say research C. Somebody would say, could I speak to Dr. Pell? And I would say speaking. That's when the pregnant pause occurred. After a minute, the person would say, you're a woman. Yeah, have been all my life, I would say. I did learn it was better to answer the phone and say, research C, Eva Pell speaking. But probably more awkward than this was the experience I had when I started going to regional and national meetings. Now, to appreciate this, you need to understand, I was 25 years old. I had hair down to my waist. Remember, this Al Wood was bald as a bat. And I wore granny glasses. So a few of the paternalistic faculty would take me around, and instead of introducing me as, I'd like you to meet our newest faculty member, they would say, this is Eva Pell. She's Al Wood's replacement. And they'd step back. And I can't tell you how many times this happened. The look on people's face was completely dumbstruck. And eventually they would blurt out, oh, she has more hair than Al Wood. Well, I kid you not, I heard that line over and over again. Well, as the years went by, 26 of them, my hair got shorter, got a little grayer. My glasses got bigger, then they got smaller. My program became very successful and well-funded, internationally recognized. But there is no doubt, without the early mentorship of Eileen Brennan, who gave me the inner confidence to believe in myself, and then Sam Smith, who taught me the political realities of the academy, I'm not sure that I would have been nearly as successful. One of the great joys in running a research program is having the chance to mentor students. I hope that I have followed the adage of paying it forward, as I had the opportunity to mentor women and men all aspiring to meet their goals. It's interesting to reflect on the many conversations that I had with students over the years. They all had insecurities and had to weigh how to use their education. With time, it wasn't just women who wondered about the ideal time to have children or how to balance a two-body problem, namely the dual career challenge. Often young men had partnered up with a mate who was also seeking a career, sometimes in the same field. As a mentor, it was my role to listen and to share perspective, always recognizing that my path was not the only one. The one message I did give to those who would ask is, having it all is an illusion. You can have a successful career and you can have a family, but don't expect to have a lot of extra time for anything else. A career and a family will consume you in a good way. A number of the very talented women I mentored for PhD programs told me after receiving their degrees that they respected me, but they didn't want my life. That made me kind of sad. I loved my crazed existence with a husband, 2 children, 11 months apart, and a lab full of people I thought of as mentees and friends. Yes, I was always chasing after the next grant to keep everyone fed, grading papers, running to meetings, teaching a class, and then heading to my daughter's field hockey game or picking up a carload of kids after Hebrew school. But what a life. I recognized that I had to step back and help my students find their respective paths. It is interesting to see they've all done different things with their careers, from the Forest Service, academia, professional societies, lab managers, and private industry. All have used their education in ways that have made society better, and I think most of them have found their careers fulfilling, and that is ultimately what counts. The next phase of my career turns to the dark side as I entered university administration. As my research program grew, it became clear, at least to others, that I had a talent for organization and communication. People began to hound me with administrative opportunities. With a young, growing family, I had no interest to go down that road. I knew the limits to what was possible. Plus, a professor was the best job at the university. But as time went along, I kept getting more interesting and better committee assignments, finally chairing the search for president and provost at Penn State. That's when I got into trouble. It's too long a story to go into now, but when I was offered the position of vice president for research and dean of the graduate school, I had to make a decision. My youngest child was a senior in college, and this was an interesting job. The two things about which I was most passionate, research and graduate education. If I turned this down, there was unlikely to be another opportunity like this coming along anytime soon. It wasn't the wrong time in my life, and it wasn't the wrong job. So I decided to take the leap. Arriving at President's Council for the first time in 1999 was very different than when I arrived in 1973 as a junior faculty member. People knew me, they respected me, and they believed I was capable. Not that there weren't challenges in going from the independence of your own lab to the intrigue of overseeing research and graduate education for a university with 24 campuses. There was still a lot to prove, but this time everybody wanted me to succeed. In one way, things weren't that different. Of the 12 of us on President's Council when I joined, only 2 were women, the other being the vice president for administration who started with me. Not long after we started, the university hired a 3rd woman to be the vice president for student affairs. The time for 25% of us to be women on President's Council, however, was very short-lived. The vice president for administration died very young, which was a source of great sorrow to me personally, as we had become good friends. And the woman who was vice president for student affairs departed for other reasons. I was alone again. By then, it was far easier as I had established myself and was fortunately doing well. But make no mistake about it, I always felt a degree of self-consciousness. Swinging back to the role of mentorship one more time, while there were few women in the senior leadership team at Penn State, I did encounter a group of women peers at other institutions just when I needed them. Penn State is part of the Big Ten Athletic Conference, something I'm sure many of you know. What you may not know is there's also a Big Ten Academic Alliance that brings together peers from these same universities that share similar portfolios. When I attended my first senior research officer meeting of the Big Ten Alliance, I was very pleasantly surprised to discover that in 1999, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwestern, and Penn State all had women in that role. That was roughly a third of the group. As an aside, the chair of the group when I arrived was the vice president for research at the University of Iowa, and that happened to have been David Skorton. The most senior of the women in the group was Virginia Hinshaw from Wisconsin. And she immediately took it upon herself to ensure that I got opportunities to speak at all the large organizational meetings that the group of us attended. She later went on to be chancellor at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and the flagship campus. And she and I remain friends to this day. Watching these women at the meetings and having their comradeship gave me a boost early on that helped me to secure my footing. I'm sure a lot of you or all of you know what professors do and what researchers do. The job of vice president for research and even graduate dean are probably a bit more mysterious. The organizers of this conference asked me to talk a bit about my role in promoting interdisciplinary collaboration at Penn State. Some of you may have heard me speak about this when I was at the Smithsonian. In my own research life, I was always collaborating with other scientists throughout the university and beyond, and those connections allowed my group to grow and morph over time. I was very fortunate to be the vice president at a time when the university was beginning to invest in major interdisciplinary institutes outside the conventional colleges. The big challenge was persuading the college deans, the ones with the big budgets, that participating would be good for them. It was clear to me that important motivators for deans were two things: money and credit. I worked with the provost to develop significant pools of resources to support institutes that my office oversaw in the developing of these areas. And those included life sciences, materials, environment, social sciences, and so on. We invited the deans to work with the institute directors to identify the areas that the institutes would emphasize. The institutes would match the deans on the relevant faculty with 50-50, and these new recruits would have their tenure homes in the colleges, that is, under the purview of the deans. When faculty brought in grants and contracts, we allowed the deans to take all the credit. Today, the institutes support hundreds of faculty, and Penn State is viewed as one of the places to go in the country if you're interested in working in an environment that has a strong interdisciplinary flavor. I would say the moral of that story is to influence change, be prepared to cede some of the control. The experience of developing the interdisciplinary ecosystem at Penn State leads me to the Smithsonian and how I came to be courted for the role of Undersecretary for Science. Wayne Clough was secretary at the time, and he was interested in exploring strategies to create a more collaborative cross-unit environment. I'm guessing that the work I did at Penn State is what got the headhunters' attention and why they called me. When I first heard from them, I wasn't at all sure that I would ever leave Penn State. I'd been there 36 years and I had such a deep love and commitment to the place. But the interviews were so interesting. The people were intriguing. And of course, the Smithsonian is, as we used to say, and maybe you still do, seriously amazing. It was the right time to make a change. I'd accomplished the major goals I'd set for myself, and the university research and graduate agendas were in a good place. I joined the Smithsonian on January 4th, 2010. I will never forget the first meeting of the Secretary's Cabinet. I walked into the Secretary's parlor. First of all, it was a round table. The President's Council at Penn State was both physically and metaphorically a long rectangular table with the president at the head. What was even more surprising was what happened when I sat down. I looked to my right. There sat Judith Leonard. I looked to my left. There sat Allison McNally, the Undersecretary for Finance and Business. And then going around the table was Evelyn Lieberman, Patty Bartlett, Ginny Clark, Tom Ott, Richard Curran, and Wayne Clough. A few months later, Claudine Brown joined our ranks. I knew who the team was before that meeting, but the impact of sitting through a meeting with my peers, and though women were in the majority, that had never happened to me in 36 years of working life. There are no words to describe how the dynamics change when the gender distribution is balanced. Those subliminal discomforts and self-consciousness just evaporate. I think we were all freer to express our views without the sense of being observed or evaluated for anything other than the merits of what we had to say. I found pockets of talented women wherever I went in DC at the time. Coming in and out of Washington over the years on Penn State business, I knew that the federal government was a more open environment than the academy, but I didn't appreciate how liberating that would feel. I know things at the Smithsonian are far from perfect, and opportunities for women can be slow to emerge. Part of that is the stability of the institution. Change takes time, and things can revert easily. For those in scientist positions, there's not a lot of upward mobility. But one thing I found interesting when I worked at the Smithsonian was noticing that people who started in one role and over time had the opportunity to try something different within the institution. If you're in the academy and you're a professor, unless you have a chance to be a department head or a dean, there actually are very few opportunities to move. For most people, that's fine. But for some people, the Smithsonian and probably other large federal agencies may offer more potential applications for people's talents. Now, that doesn't mean women scientists at the Smithsonian have it easy. Of course not. Many of you still work in male-dominated fields. Many of you engage in field work that challenges the assumptions of what women can do. And some of you work internationally, which can add a whole additional dimension to how women are perceived. But you can do it, and you are doing it. The organizers asked me what I learned that helped me keep swimming and do it with joy. That's a tough question to answer. It reminds me of a woman I once knew who was a physician. She had 3 children when she still lived in her native country of Poland. The family immigrated to Israel, where they lived briefly, and then they came to the United States. She had to recertify as a physician before she could practice medicine, all while raising these 3 kids. I asked her how she did it, and she said, "When I look back on it, it was impossible." Her life was harder than mine, but my journey was always challenging, in good and not of some good ways sometimes. Fundamental to every choice I made and every road I took was to ask, is this something worth doing? Is it going to be interesting and challenging? Do I believe in the enterprise and the organization? And do I think I'm qualified and prepared to do it? If you can check those boxes and you feel passion for the work, the rest will follow. There were many challenging individuals to be reckoned with along the way, and many men who were uncomfortable with me around. My method of choice was to use humor to disarm them and to diffuse those awkward moments. I remember one story in particular. A very flamboyant man was at one of these coffees I was telling you about earlier. And I went in and I sat down, I had my coffee, and he started telling Myron Cohn jokes. You may not know who Myron Cohn is, but he's rather off color. A number of the other men in the room, the faculty, were very uncomfortable because I was there. Unfortunately, I was sitting as far from the door as I could be, and the only way out of the room was the window, and that didn't seem like the best way to get out. I just kept sitting there, and my skin just was crawling. And finally, I got up. I walked to the front of the room where this gent was holding forth, put my arm around him, and I said, "Bill, I'm going to leave now. I don't want to cramp your style." Everyone laughed. I left. And the next couple of times I came to coffee, I walked in and he goes, "Oh, here's Eva. I'm going to tell some Myron Cohen jokes." But he never did again. Sometimes it took a lot of effort to jolly the men along, and in retrospect, it made me mad to think I needed to expend that much energy. But ultimately, it was far more effective than drawing battle lines, even if I did have the ammunition to win. There are other approaches, and everyone has to operate in their own skins and comfort zone. My mentor, Eileen Brennan, used to say, "Give yourself a break." That's great wisdom. Do the best you can. Sometimes you'll fall short. That's okay too. In this talk, you've heard a lot about the merits of mentors and the appreciation for the pioneers who paved the way. And you've heard a fair bit about my personal journey. The last thing I want to say, however, is that every successful person is dependent upon a lot of players who are rarely acknowledged or recognized. These individuals are not always women, but they often are. These are the people who either didn't aspire to be the top banana or might not have had the privilege, or because of either lack of opportunity or education, to move into those roles. For me, there were a consecutive group of 3 wonderful lab managers who oversaw everything in my research program and helped me evolve the vision of where our field might go. When I went to work as an administrator in Old Main at Penn State, I was greeted by a wonderful team of women who did everything from managing my calendar and anticipating my sense of humor while putting together PowerPoint presentations to overseeing financial units and orchestrating board meetings for tech transfer and various other boards we were responsible for. They always had my back. And of course, here at the Smithsonian, I was once again incredibly fortunate to have teammates who made every visitor feel welcome, who partnered with me to tell the stories of science at the Smithsonian, and who helped frame the management of our finances and our facilities so that we could articulate a vision for science at the Smithsonian. And maybe just as important, they became my friends. The picture of what it takes to be successful can never be filled out without recognizing these people. For me, the joy in getting to know these wonderful individuals, learning of their goals and their frustrations, and sharing the day-to-day work has as much to do with feeling satisfaction in the work as any loftier goals. I will close by saying thank you to all the men and women with whom I have shared a journey that very few are lucky enough to take. Thank you very much. And again, I send you all virtual hugs.
Wasn't that just fantastic? Dr. Pell, we are so glad you could join us today. Next up is a short break. Grab some water and stretch it out, and then come back in about 5 minutes. For the moment, we'll be playing a short video featuring Dr. Elizabeth Cottrell of the National Museum of Natural History.
My name is Liz Cottrell. I'm a curator here at the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian Institution and director of the Global Volcanism Program. I've always loved science ever since I was a little kid. My dad would take me down in the basement. We'd do science experiments. We built a model of an atom one time. We'd play with electric fields and magnets, making electromagnetic compasses. You don't need to be the top mathematician in your school to have a career in science, not at all. Doing well in your science classes and math classes certainly helps in the sciences because a lot of science does come down to having some quantitative skills, but there's other skills that are equally important. Good communication skills are really important. I think the most successful scientists are those with good writing skills, good presentation skills, good people skills, good teamwork skills. That's a really fun thing about science. It's a lot of teamwork. I think the most important thing in school is just to pursue what you're interested in. You become really passionate about it, pursue it, and see what the next step is. Well, is there a local lab I can go and work in? Becoming a scientist is a bit of an apprenticeship. You find a mentor and you apprentice yourself to that mentor and you try to learn everything you can from that person. And then someday you become the teacher and you start teaching the next generation. I didn't know what kind of scientist I wanted to be. Chemistry became my favorite subject in high school, and it was only when I took a class in college on volcanoes on other planets that I became really fascinated with planetary science and structures on other planets. Wanting to go to that higher level in science also came through a conversation with my dad where we were talking about what it means to be a scientist as a career, and him saying, well, you really need to be discovering new things that people have never discovered before. And that just really appealed to me, the idea of being an explorer and an adventurer, and at the same time understanding the natural world. I love my job. I love my job as a scientist. I love my job here at the Smithsonian. My schedule is my own. That's a great thing if you have a family because it makes me really flexible. I can go pick my daughter up in the afternoon and hang out with her and play with her. But if I do that, then after she goes to bed, I have to work again at night.
Oh, you showed Dad that you are.
I could never stay home and give up working as a scientist, and I can't imagine life without my daughter, Madeline. I teach my daughter about science all the time, even though she's only 2 years old. I try to give her the most accurate explanation that I can. You know, just the other day, we were biking home from work, and she looked up at the sky, and it was daylight, and she said, "Where'd the moon go? Where'd the moon go?" And, you know, to tell her, oh, the sun is shining so brightly that we don't see the moon, was a more accurate answer than the moon went to sleep. So it's fun to see her learn about all this stuff. It's really important to me as a scientist that people understand the scientific process, that science isn't making guesses, that it's a system of testing ideas in order to arrive at what really is the truth. And helping people to understand that process is really important to me, and there's no place better to do that than the Smithsonian.
Welcome back. Our next session is Tracing Historical Pathways into STEM, with presentations by Dr. Pamela Henson of the Smithsonian Institution Archives, Dr. Peggy Kidwell of the National Museum of American History, and Dr. Sally Kolstedt from the University of Minnesota. Afterwards, we'll have a brief Q&A moderated by Dr. Elizabeth Harmon, so please remember to submit your questions in the box below this video.
Hello, and welcome to our panel session, Tracing Historical Pathways of Women into STEM. Today, we know that the historical accomplishments of women in science are under-recognized. Often, their names and accomplishments are not easily discoverable online. Educators and museum professionals want to change this. They want to share the stories of women in science because women, especially women of color, are still underrepresented in the sciences today. To inspire the next generation, we want to uncover and share examples of women as trailblazers in scientific fields. This call for more resources is one that we should answer. But I want to take a step back and recognize that the reason we know that we can be sure that women are underrepresented in historical accounts of the development of American science is because in the 1960s and 1970s, historians of science forged a new field of research. By adding women to the historical accounts of American science, often as colleagues questioned the scholarly value of studying women in science at all, and the likelihood of finding much to research. In other words, in this earlier period, it was assumed by many historians that women had not played a pivotal role in developing science in the United States. Before archival finding aids were online, or you could Google women in science and pull up resources, historians were in archives and museums studying, describing, and seeking to preserve evidence of the role women have played in American science, to challenge this belief that women had not contributed to science in the United States. Thanks to their work, we now have collections, books, and articles that provide us with the names and accomplishments of many women in science, whom we can continue to learn more about. Today, we will hear from 3 historians who have helped establish the history of women in science as a field of research. Professor Sally Gregory Kolstedt, Dr. Pamela Henson, and Dr. Peggy Kidwell. I encourage you to take a look at their impressive bios on our conference website. And now, to get started, I'll turn things over to Dr. Kolstedt.
Thanks, Liz. The Smithsonian is a special place that, as we will learn from my colleagues today, holds a significant evidence of women's participation in science and technology. Inspired in part by my girlhood model, Nancy Drew, history drew me in because it holds mysteries that require investigation. So today I will briefly sketch the ways in which scholarly sleuths recovered the history of women in science in the United States. I came of academic age in the early 1970s, just as the field of history of science was expanding and when women's issues were coming to the forefront. Little was known about women in science, and according to many men colleagues at the time, very little was likely to be found. But that posed the challenge. So stage one was investigating the biographies of women whose work was perhaps known but barely acknowledged. Women like colonist Jane Colden, who was a colonist who produced a local botanical catalog using the then state-of-the-art nomenclature from Linnaeus. In the next century, Maria Mitchell, librarian and mathematician, discovered a comet that made her singularly famous in her own time. But now historians emphasize her expertise in mathematics and her role in teaching a whole generation of women astronomers at the newly founded Vassar College. By the 20th century, of course, there were more women in science. Biographers highlighted the difficulties and the achievements of women whose names you will recognize, like geneticist Barbara McClintock, biologist Rachel Carson, and astronomer Annie Jump Cannon. Several oversized volumes of biographical dictionaries added to a growing list of outstanding women who had made significant but sometimes forgotten contributions. Stage two was moving beyond individual exceptions to find what is now called somewhat invisible labor, documenting women who provided essential infrastructure. By the 1970s, historians were probing diaries, letters, and citations, as well as investigating field sites, laboratories, and other places where science was pursued collaboratively. Women were increasingly evident, even pervasive in some fields. They were the artistic illustrators for naturalists like James Onabet, educators and writers like Emma Willard and her sister, Elmira Phelps, and other women produced literally hundreds of thousands of illustrated textbooks on all aspects of science, from geography to botany to astronomy. By the early 20th century, women participated in seaside laboratories, and Josephine Tilden, an expert on algae, created one on the Pacific coast. I love this photo because it shows their determination climbing the cliffs in those long skirts. And you'll notice that they were systematically cut 14 inches above the ground. Research also revealed that women were under-recognized participants in science in various ways. A close look at highly successful men, for example, often revealed women working with husbands in chemical laboratories, astronomical observatories, and as field naturalists. I think that in some ways, women's history helped shift the view from a standard history of great men to seeing the reality that science is a collaborative enterprise. The Darwin Correspondence Project, for example, reveals that while Charles Darwin indeed had an amazing intellect, he was also a great synthesizer of data. And indeed, he had collaborators from around the world, and many of them were women. But what explains the early oversight of women? Recorded or largely forgotten from view, and their sometimes astonishing record of engagement. By the 1980s, historians sought to segregate and aggregate these accounts to reveal patterns by field, by location, and over time. Our colleague, Margaret Rossiter, recently featured, in fact, in the Smithsonian magazine, in the 1970s began what became a lifelong commitment to documenting patterns of women and their struggles and strategies. Margaret Rossiter's work resulted in these 3 classic volumes filled with details about women's tactics and networks, as well as systematic discrimination. But equally important, she offered new concepts and frameworks for further research. She identified the niches of women's work in and beyond scientific fields, the role of compensatory recognition and special prizes for women, and what she called the Matilda effect, which explained the lack of recognition for women's achievements. And yet, when Margaret Rossiter initially applied for NSF funding, she was rebuffed. When she eventually got a grant, a congressman challenged that funding as unnecessary, even, he said, wasteful, because there were already several entries on women in science in the Library of Congress catalog. So even women historians faced some challenges. A major conference in the 1990s attracted an international audience of over 450 people, keen to address another kind of question. That is, how did research on women in science and research on gender in science relate to each other? Questions like that also led to other dimensions of historical work. I only could represent them here in my limited time to show you that there were women who were asking these other questions about how those gendered assumptions actually influence scientific work and what women's participation has actually meant in the sciences. But I hope my very brief overview has suggested just how we came to build the still growing stories of women in science, from biography to women's often invisible labor, to patterns of discrimination and strategic reaction. There is much to investigate yet in the history of women in the sciences. Such history creates legacies, but it also provides data about the sources that enabled these intrepid women to challenge stereotypes and even, to many, to acknowledge their work together as they tried to change societies, universities, corporate and government laboratories and other sites so that they could, in fact, pursue the research that they loved. Most of the recent reports from NSF, the national academies, and other organizations utilize historical data. It is significant, I think, that one of my recent PhDs in the history of science, Fraser Binya, has been the lead editor on two of the most recent reports from the academies, one on sexual harassment and the other on promising practices. I think these reports remind us how much there is to be done. So let me close by inviting each of you, especially those of you at the Smithsonian, to join this investigatory work about our past in order to direct even better plans for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Today, I'm focusing on the contributions and challenges of Smithsonian women scientists, beginning with a 1924 quote about why women should not be allowed to do field work in Panama. It begins, I am myself a married man and as fond of my wife as any man could be, but. And it goes on to say, if they let women in, they can't keep the same intellectual level as a group of men. Women disrupt the sacred element of male fellowship. Women introduce petty concerns. No one can eliminate the sex element. And women cost money for separate facilities. He closes, let us keep a place where real research men can find quiet, keen intellectual stimulation, freedom from any outside distraction. These are the attitudes and obstacles women faced and continue to face. But we'll hear about men who were strong mentors to women and women who charted fabulous paths. Women began contributing to Smithsonian science after the Smithsonian was founded in 1846 by sending weather observations to our meteorological project created by Secretary Henry. Wives of observers pitched in, but so did teachers and other people. Family connections were very important. In 1886, Mary Jane Rathbun began assisting her brother, Richard Rathbun, in marine invertebrates. As he moved into administration, she became curator, but she soon gave up her salary so a young man could be hired. Some participated in science as illustrators, since art was deemed appropriate for women. Others by serving as lab assistants or numerical calculators. There were two fields that were receptive to women, anthropology and botany. In the 1880s, the Bureau of American Ethnology hired women to conduct research with Native American women. However, they were all contract employees with little status. Botany was also much more open to women. Indeed, by the 1890s, Science magazine asked if botany was still an appropriate subject for young men. Agnes Chase began illustrating grasses, encouraged by male mentors. She worked at the National Museum from 1903, but was paid by USDA. She became a noted grass specialist. After she participated in suffrage hunger strikes, USDA tried to fire her, but her mentor, Hitchcock, would not allow it. Eventually, she became an honorary SI curator. And it was Hitchcock's attempt to get Smithsonian funding for her Panama fieldwork that led to Fairchild's letter. An irony former Director Larson likes is that the Stry National Academy of Sciences Fellows, the first 4 were women. A steady stream of women botanists followed Chase, including a recent loss to the Smithsonian and the Women's Initiative, Vicki Funk, who's at center. As Rathman and Chase broke glass ceilings, a new one was created in 1996 when the civil service was applied to SI. Over 60% of required civil service exams were closed to women. Hiring officials could also indicate gender and race desired for the hire, and most said white male. Women could no longer even apply. After women's suffrage, the exams were open to everyone, but jobs still indicated gender and race. African Americans, even when they did museum and scientific work, were always classified as laborers, which paid much less. Women in other departments were not so fortunate. Invertebrate zoology seemed the worst. Evelyn Mitchell, a suffragist and insect illustrator in the 1910s, was driven out by her supervisor, Harrison Gray Dyer. She then pursued a great career as a medical doctor. Pearl Lee Boone was driven out of IZ by curators Waldo Schmidt and Paul Barch. Barch was known as the bottom sampler for his studies of marine burrow organisms, but also for his habit of grabbing women's bottoms. Women also began to receive degrees from the women's colleges and even PhDs. In 1930, Dr. Florence Meyer Chase joined the staff of the Radiation Biology Laboratory, now CERC, to study the effect of sunlight on plants. She may be the first woman with an earned PhD at the Smithsonian. Doris Mabel Cochran was hired as a museum aide in herpetology in the early 1920s. Although she received a PhD in 1933, she did not advance to associate curator until 1942. After filing grievances, she was made curator in 1956. But the Great Depression delivered more blows to women. The Economy Act of 1932 singled out married women to be laid off from federal jobs if their spouses were government employees. These anti-nepotism practices continued for decades. When anthropologist Betty Meggers came to the Smithsonian with her husband Cliff Evans, she was made an honorary curator and worked unpaid for 75 years. In World War II, jobs and promotions opened up to women. Sophie Lutterloh, an African American, defied many conventions. In 1943, she became the museum's first female elevator operator. She loved natural history and convinced one curator to hire her as a research assistant in entomology. She loved her job so much, she said she hated to retire after 40 years. The 1950s did not see great advancement for women, but some moved forward quietly. Roxy Laybourne arrived in 1944 to prepare bird specimens, but in the 1950s she developed a new field of science, forensic ornithology, studying the remains of birds ingested into airplane engines, causing crashes. Despite harassment, she was encouraged by Secretary Westmore and John Aldridge, and her career soared. Other women struggled. In 1942, Lucille St. Hoyme became museum aide in physical anthropology, but had to file grievances after she received her PhD in 1964 to advance to assistant curator. The 1960s saw an era of change and optimism. Under Secretary Ripley, we grew exponentially, and this opened up many opportunities. Jackie Olam was the first of many women to work at the new Conservation Laboratory, now MCI. Marion Pettibone joined invertebrate zoology in 1963 and paved the way for Mary Rice in 1966, who then became our first woman science director at the Smithsonian Marine Station at Fort Pierce. SAO in its new form at Harvard saw women astronomers do more than calculations, including Ursula Marvin, Christine Foreman-Jones, Andrea Dupree, and Margaret Geller. 1970s, a woman scientist finally joined the STRI staff, although she was wife of the director, but Olga Linares soon proved her scientific talents. The Smithsonian Women's Council, created in 1972, addressed women's issues. Their newsletter, the 4-Star and Torch column, highlighted women across the institution. Women had raised the issue of daycare for years, and SEEK finally opened in 1986. In 1979, the council invited Gloria Steinem to lecture on her year at the Woodrow Wilson Center, then in the Castle. She noted of Smithsonian employees holding grades 8 or below, 51.3% were women. Grades 9 to 14, 32.7% women. Grade 15 and above, 5% women. Today, women scientists continue to make progress, although often 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Today, we have a fabulous array of women scientists leading research across the globe. There are still issues of harassment, inequities in opportunity, challenges of family responsibilities, and implicit bias affecting our work. I hope this conference provokes strategic thinking that leads to concrete actions to assure equal opportunity for all. Thank you.
Today, I will be talking about women in STEM education as you see it from evidence in the Smithsonian Mathematics collections. The Smithsonian Mathematics collections are a group of objects which I spend a great deal of time studying. Many of the things in the collections of the National Museum of American History that get attention are associated with well-known American scientists and mathematicians. So, for example, we have the telescope that was used by Maria Mitchell as she was teaching at Vassar College. We also have the microscope of Barbara McClintock, who worked studying corn genetics and actually ended up winning a Nobel Prize. But I also want to mention a drawing of computer bugs by Grace Mary Hopper. Grace Mary Hopper was a mathematician by training. She studied at Vassar, which is where Maria Mitchell went, or taught, and then she studied at Yale University and went back and taught at Vassar. But when World War II broke out, she decided she wanted to do something different. She went to Harvard and worked on a computer, one of the first computers called the Mark I. While she was at Harvard, she learned the term computer bug, and she drew this picture of various kinds of bugs that she encountered as person programming the Mark I. She would remain in the computer industry for the rest of her very long career, and we have wonderful things associated with her work. But those are not the kind of people I wish to emphasize today. Instead, I want to talk about the women who taught mathematics at many different levels. Most Americans have studied mathematics at some level under a woman. This blackboard from a school in New Hampshire suggests the role of women as classroom mathematics teachers, a role they assumed increasingly in the course of the 1820s and 1830s, particularly in the northern states. We do not know the names of the women or men who used this blackboard. It came from a schoolhouse. We know the name of the school, but we don't know the names of everybody who taught there. The drawing on it shown is the drawing that might have been used by a teacher in roughly 1830. We do sometimes know the names of the people who owned various textbooks. This is a worn out copy of a book by a guy named Joseph Ray called Test Examples in Arithmetic. This edition of it is from 1862. It was actually first published considerably earlier. This copy of it is signed by Murter Corbett, who was a student in New England in roughly the 1860s. We have several textbooks that were signed by the girls who owned them. This is one very small way of showing how women interacted with mathematics as they were girls. Another kind of object that we have in the collection is called a numeral frame, or a kind of abacus. It is a set of beads. There are almost always 10 beads going crosswise. They move crosswise and indicate various numbers. It was a device that was widely used in teaching arithmetic starting in the 1820s and into the end of the century. We also have some things that were associated with specific women. As women came to increasingly teach in elementary schools, seminaries were established, teachers' seminaries where women could learn to teach arithmetic and other mathematical subjects. Emmeline Ketchum went to such a school in Missouri, and then she got a position as a special student at Brown University. She was not actually allowed to be an enrolled student, but she was a special student. While she was a special student, she developed these fraction balls. A fraction ball is sort of like an apple that you can slice up to indicate whether you've got a half, as is on the case in the left, or a third, or some other fraction. Ketchum patented her fraction balls in 1895. They never sold very well, but she was very proud of the invention. Other girls studied with teachers who encouraged them to make geometric models. There was a teacher named Harry Wheeler who taught in Worcester, Massachusetts, and these are some of the models made by girls who are in his charge. This Wheeler also got a special appointment at Wellesley College, and Lois Parker, who made this model, was studying under Wheeler as a student at Wellesley, and we know that she went on to become a math teacher. So you can see that we have lots of obscure little objects that reflect the role of women in mathematics learning and mathematics teaching. We also have things that women devised to encourage very young children to learn about numbers. There was a woman named Catherine Stern who was born in Germany. She grew up in Germany, and then in 1938, even though she was employed as a Montessori school teacher, she was really worried because she was Jewish and she was afraid as to what Hitler might do to her and her family. So they all up and left Germany, and she came to the United States, where she made this structural arithmetic kit, which combined elements of the Montessori teaching apparatus with things that Catherine Stern herself had devised. Catherine Stern's apparatus did not become widely popular, although Montessori schools certainly did, and women certainly have had a long-standing association with elementary mathematics instruction as it expanded downward. Finally, I want, without going into huge detail, to suggest that women purchased and arranged the purchase of objects for use in teaching their students. On the left is a class register from 1904 that was purchased by Nanny Burroughs. Nanny Burroughs was an African-American woman who would go on to teach at a business college or business school in Washington, D.C., where for years her students would learn how to do basic salesmanship on a cash register like that one. You may not be able to see it, but this very elegant cash register has the name Burroughs across the front of it. Two other objects that represent this same women using objects to teach students are the slide rule on the top. It is a 6-foot-long teaching slide rule that was used at a girls' high school in Pittsburgh in the 1960s and 70s. And below that, an electronic calculator, a graphing electronic calculator that was used by a woman teaching students in California in the 1980s. So I hope I have given you some sense that at the Smithsonian, we not only have active women doing science, but we have attempted to preserve the history of women teaching and learning mathematics. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks to our presenters. Your talks remind us of the intentional work it takes to ensure our archives, collections, and historical scholarship include women. We have a few questions from the audience now. I want to start with a question for you, Sally. Today, women are still underrepresented in STEM, and in the libraries, archives, and museums world, we still talk about the invisibility of women in a lot of our collections. Can you tell us a little more about what it was like to begin your research on women in science in the 1970s? And from your perspective, how has the field matured and how might it develop?
Oh, that's a very good question, because in point of fact, when we started, no one had really tried to identify the women who were in these collections, and those invisible women were really quite invisible. And so it became kind of a strategic thing to see when a husband credited his wife, or when the dictionary said, and his wife was also in the same field, and you said, oh, then I wonder what she was doing. And so we began to find these clues for women that we could investigate. So I think part of it was that investigatory thing. Very quickly, a number of women started doing finding aids. Rima Apple, for example, at University of Wisconsin created, where do we know about women in science? And all of us started looking at the collections that were in our backyards and saying, oh, there's material on so-and-so and so-and-so. So that helped to generate both student work and more academic work. So I think it was kind of a strategic plan to find out where these women were. And I think today we have many more finding aids that will help us get to that kind of material.
Thank you. And Sally, Peggy, I would love to ask you a question next. Peggy, Sally and Pam have both studied women's roles in natural history education, especially the nature study movement. Women's contributions to mathematics are far less known though. We've been recently hearing about hidden figures and now women math teachers. Why have women's contributions to math been so hidden?
I think it is partly because the fields where mathematics is most widely applied, such as engineering, are not as closely tied as the practical applications of biology in things like nursing, and so you have large numbers of students available there. My grandmother wrote a textbook with her husband, who was a chemist. They were both chemists, that was specifically designed for nursing students at the University of Minnesota. There were no such students at an advanced in engineering in nearly as large a number.
Thank you. And Pam, we got a really interesting question in the chat for you as well. This questioner wants to know, did the women you're talking about ever report the issues of harassment that you mentioned? And if so, what action was ever taken against their harassers?
In the case of someone like Evelyn Mitchell that early on, no, because who would she report it to? And what would have been done? Not much. In later years, yes, women did. And there was actually a demonstration in the 70s outside the American History Museum. They weren't getting much of a response there. And so the women just went out there with signs and said, we are being We are being denied promotions, denied advancement, but also being sexually harassed by an administrator in this museum. And some action was apparently taken thereafter. These are personnel files, so they're a little hard to get at. But women have, in fact, become much more vocal and much more visible. And then at some point, we all started getting training in sexual harassment, and we established an ombudsman, which will handle those types of complaints as well with discretion. You don't have to stand outside a museum to get some notice. But that's what it took, I think, to get the first real administrative response at the Smithsonian.
Thank you. Yeah, Sally, do you want to add?
So I was going to just tag on to that with a question for Pam, because it struck me that the Smithsonian is really an excellent mirror on the experiences of women in science over the past century and a half. And certainly there were some women who were starting to get organized in the early 20th century, and they didn't always do it within their institutions, but elsewhere. And I wonder if there's much evidence at the Smithsonian that even though it took till the 1970s for a strong coordinated action, if there's some evidence of the women who were at the SI doing activist kinds of things, either inside or outside the institution earlier.
Well, certainly we had several suffragists. So back in the 1920s, for really sexual harassment behavior, you don't see anything really that coordinated except through this Women's Council, which really began to address issues like that and support people who filed complaints against them. But that did not go really beyond the Smithsonian as far as I know. In some very specific fields, specifically Arctic and Antarctic geology studies, there have been huge issues of harassment of women in the field, really brutal. I think you're going to hear a little bit about one of those from one of the papers on the Arctic we have coming up. But there was a Smithsonian staff member who was subjected to it. She does not appear to have done much, but eventually women who were treated that way as a group wound up getting that guy kicked out of his university and cut off from further grants to go there. So there have been collective actions across units, across colleges, research institutes, that have been effective.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is going to be our last question, unfortunately, but a topic that has come up in the chat and that comes up frequently is how do we define the boundaries of who is a woman in science or that category? And how is that changed over time? And I know that this is a big question, but Peggy, I wondered if you'd mind starting simply because, computation comes to my mind and computers, right? So I wonder if you have a perspective on this.
It certainly was, there were certainly areas of mathematics, such as computation, that in some countries, particularly the United States, were dominated by women until the introduction of electronic computers, really. The borders as to what one studies, the borders as to what one is allowed to do, are very different at various institutions. So some places people started as computers and then went further along in their careers. Some places they were very definitely relegated to a corner.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a closing thought on that?
Well, it seems to me that what we've really done, and I tried to say that in my talk, that women are in science and they are everywhere in science. And what we've learned to do is to look for the women who are just as exceptional as the men who got a lot of prizes and prestige, and to also look at the women who are just critical to the infrastructure in various places. And so I'm really excited about where we're going to go from here in the history of women in science.
Thank you, Sally. That's a wonderful place to end. And thank you so much again. I've really enjoyed hearing your remarks.
Me too. It's been fun.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harmon, Dr. Henson, Dr. Kidwell, and Dr. Kolstedt. We'll round out this afternoon's sessions with a panel conversation. The Price of Being a Minority Woman in Science. Dr. Shirley Malcom reflects on 44 years of the double bind, which will feature Dr. Shirley Malcom, Katrina Lashley of the Anacostia Community Museum, Acting Undersecretary for Education, Ruki Newhold Ravi Kumar, and Dr. Carol O'Donnell, Director of the Smithsonian Science Education Center. This session will also be followed by a Q&A, so please submit your questions in the box below this video.
Hello, I'm Ruki Newhold Ravi Kumar, Acting Undersecretary for Education at the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian, during her long legacy, has focused on the increase and diffusion of knowledge. With that mission, we are a natural convener of conversations on topics of historic and contemporary relevance. I'm so very thrilled to be a part of this panel with extraordinary women in science. Each member of the panel has a powerful story to tell, but what makes each of them incredible is their commitment to education and their efforts to clear pathways for the next generation of women in science. This session is titled The Double Bind: The Price of Being a Minority Woman in Science. I have the distinct honor of welcoming our featured speaker, Dr. Shirley Malcom. Dr. Malcom is a senior advisor and director of Sea Change at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In her more than 40-year tenure at the association, she has worked to improve the quality and increase access to education and careers in STEM, as well as to enhance public science literacy. Dr. Malcom is a trustee of Caltech and regent of Morgan State University. She's a former member of the National Science Board, the policy-making body of the U.S. National Science Foundation, and has served on President Clinton's Committee of Advisors on Science and Technology. Dr. Malcom, a native of Birmingham, Alabama, received her PhD in ecology from Pennsylvania State University, master's in zoology from UCLA, and bachelor's with distinction in zoology from the University of Washington. In addition, she holds 17 honorary degrees. Dr. Malcom is a former high school science teacher and university faculty member. She serves on the boards of the Heinz Endowment's Public Agenda, National Math Science Initiative, and Digital Promise Global. In 2003, Dr. Malcom received the Public Welfare Medal of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the highest award given by the Academy. Welcome, Dr. Malcom.
Thank you, Ruki. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be able to talk about the double bind. It's interesting how this all came about. I was a young professional who had gone to work at AAAS after having left a faculty position. Of course, I was eager to learn about what was going on. I had always thought I had gone to the wrong institutions because I hadn't seen anybody who looked like me in the institutions which I had attended. So my boss at the time, Janet Brown, had gone to a project directors meeting. And at that meeting, she had that focused on projects that were undertaken to bring more minorities into the sciences. She had been the only woman present. As a matter of fact, the rest of the attendees were minority men who had been running those programs with support from the foundation. So then she was invited to speak to a group of project directors for the women's programs that NSF was funding. And when she got into the room, she realized that all of the women who were there were white. And she came back to the office and she said to me, "Is there an issue with regard to women of color in science?" And I said, "Yes." And that was the birth of the Double Bind Conference in 1975 that led to the report in 1976. That was the only way that we could figure out how to describe that in fact, that somehow women of color were being left out of the discussions and that we were not included in terms of the numbers, and we were not included in terms of the activities and the efforts that were being undertaken. So if you fast forward, you realize that those numbers had not really crept up that much. The numbers are still lagging. You look at computer science, you find the same kinds of issues. You look at engineering, you find the same kinds of issues with regard to women of color. And I think that we have seen some areas where we've seen growth, such as in the life sciences, but there are real problems still. And almost any indicator that you look at, women of color are still lagging behind. So one of the things that I was wondering 30 some years later, when we were reflecting on the anniversary of the publication of the double bind, was where are we now? So I decided that I would do that. I wanted to do that with my daughter. And so what we did was we would sit together and we would talk about the issues and we would say, okay, what does it look like for the next generation? And what she said to me was very revealing. She said, I looked back at the double bind publication and all of the things that you said, you being the women who were there, who were invited to tell their stories, all of the things that the publication, the report says that needed to be done, that you controlled as women scientists of color, you did them. You accomplished them. You gave career information. You were active in terms of trying to mobilize yourselves and everything. You did those things. The things that didn't happen, you didn't have control over. And one you have to look at is not just the personal issues, but the institutional requirements. How are the institutions failing you? And I thought about that and I realized she's right. We can't just assume, those of us who are women of color in science or engineering or medicine, we can't take on all the issues because we don't control them all. And so what are the institutions not doing in terms of supporting women of color? So you look at almost any report, for example, the National Academy's report on sexual harassment, and it talked about different impacts on different women. The impact was greatest, for example, on women in medicine as opposed to in science and engineering. But of all the women, it was most difficult for women who were basically in this intersectional space. Women of color, LGBTQ populations, all of us who lived in this intersectional space had some of the major impacts on us. So the question really returns to this notion, where do we go now? Since we know that it has to be an institutional response, how do we really respond to it? And that was one of the things that we looked at when we were actually thinking about sea change, STEM equity achievement change, to affect what happens in institutions. I've also had the opportunity to work not just on the US side, but also on the global side, and really have come to understand that we're not the only ones who are experiencing these kinds of issues of being somehow expected to operate with both racism and sexism having an impact on us. And that women in other places basically are experiencing many of the same things. I've served as a co-chair of the Gender Advisory Board of the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development, and of co-chair of a group called Gender Insight, which is associated with the World Academy of Sciences for Advancing Science in the Developing World, and also with the Inter-Academy Partnership. The major point is that we experience challenges as both women and as people of color, and that we cannot move the needle by ourselves, that while there are things that we can accomplish, we must also expect that institutions will play a major part by chronicling the challenges that we face with regard to recruitment or hiring or as students or in the workforce or what have you. People have to look at the issues that affect the double bind very specifically. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to move forward. So I want to just share with you what I learned over the years about what the challenges are and hope that the women who are coming along will be able to pick up the gauntlet, as it were, that we have struggled with over the years. Not only myself, but also my daughter, and hopefully not my granddaughter, so that we can be able to contribute to making this a better, more sustainable world. That is what we want to do. We want to be a part of the solution, but we have to depend on space being made that will allow us to do that.
That was very, very inspiring. I think what I'm most excited about the American Women's History Initiative is that we're attempting to fill the gaps in our history, but it means that the next generation of young women will have role models. And for every young woman who's been told no because there are no women in that field, she now has people to point to be inspired by, and to have the confidence sometimes to be the first or to be the only. You've talked a little bit about how systems need to change, institutions need to change. You've also talked about how your background in Birmingham, Alabama, and growing up in the 50s and 60s motivates you to think and act differently. The young women of today are finding themselves in a generation-defining moment between COVID and the dual pandemics that are going on. What advice do you have for young women so that, as you said, it does not continue to repeat through generations? And what do you mean by getting into good trouble?
Oh, I love this idea of good trouble. John Lewis was a speaker at Caltech for commencement, and I heard him and I was inspired once again. And I hope that young women will understand that the moment that we're in, essentially we're in a pandemic, we are also in a moment of reckoning with regard to systemic racism. And it is the confluence of those, I hope, that will inspire them to understand that they can contribute. It was the confluence of living in a space that was the epicenter of the civil rights movement, and at the same time, this monumental scientific moment of Sputnik that led me to think I could contribute and I could move forward. I didn't realize the extent to which I would be the only in so many places. And I think that that is a real challenge because it's very hard to be what you can't see. And so moving this forward, I would hope that the young women of today would get around and look around and begin to understand the extent to which women of color are leading with regard to moving in this space of the COVID space, along with the systemic racism awareness space. There was a recent article in the New York Times Magazine that focused on Black women microbiologists. We need to note that the NIH response at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, that this vaccine response is being led by a young African-American woman, and that the efforts to try to address vaccine development and testing, that there are many women of color that are involved in these efforts across the nation. So be inspired. Be inspired by the challenges that are there and look forward to what you can contribute. But in the meantime, be aware that you need to vote, that you need to engage yourselves in the processes that focus on bringing resources to research, bringing resources to vaccine development, bringing resources to addressing whatever the next pandemic is likely to be.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katrina Lashley. I'm Program Coordinator of Urban Waterways at Anacostia Community Museum. Urban Waterways is an ongoing program that explores the relationship between urban communities and their waterways. And one of the project's ongoing initiatives is Women's Environmental Leadership, which has been documenting the various ways women have led and will continue to lead environmental spaces. Our work is guided by three main areas of focus: mentorship, education training, and leadership, all done with the understanding that there are multiple pathways to leadership in these spaces. And so, especially through the sciences. And so, Dr. Malcom, I wanted to ask you, especially thinking about these young women who are just entering these fields, they're hoping to follow in the footsteps of women that they admire. What are the various ways that those who are already in scientific fields can actively partner with community organizations, institutions to advance women of color in the sciences, especially thinking of K through 12, specifically looking at collaborations that lead to success, and those types of collaborations that are bound to fail?
Katrina, I am so proud of the fact that you're out there in the community, because that's what you have to do. You have to go to where people are. You can't expect them to come to you all the time. And you have to address the issues that they face. With my role at AAAS, we have run programs, for example, that have been based in the community. We have worked with churches. We have worked with community-based and youth-serving groups. We have worked with sororities to try to bring programming based in science and engineering into the community. That is what has to happen. And it has to be done in partnership, just as you are doing, because what really inspires people is when you are addressing issues that are relevant to them. That is a key point, to be situated in the community, working with the community, being a real person to the community, that they see that in addition to being a scientist, you're also just a regular person. And I think that that's key to trying to break down some of the barriers that often occur between the community of color and the science community. And we, as women of color, often have a very strong service urge, and that gives us an opportunity as well to be able to message and to be able to present ourselves as role models, and to provide a little bit of career guidance as well about what it's likely to take to move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Malcom, for your incredible words of wisdom and all of your guidance, both historically and currently, to support women of color in science. My name is Carol O'Donnell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Smithsonian Science Education Center. And I also serve on the Global Council of the Inter-Academy Partnership Science Education Program. And at the heart of our work is the idea that all youth, regardless of their gender, geography, race, native language, ability, or socioeconomic status, should be given the opportunities to learn about the socio-scientific issues that challenge us all. The Smithsonian, through the Smithsonian Science Education Center, plays an active role in sparking students and teachers' interest in STEM to ensure a scientifically literate and sustainable planet. And we educate girls and boys ages 8 to 17 on the science that underlies the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which, as I know you know because you've written about this, are ambitious goals that the globe hopes to achieve by 2030. Dr. Malcom, in one of your papers you wrote, "Growing up Black and female in the 1950s and 60s, segregated South, the concept of sustainability was not on your radar. The economy of the region was based accessing and using resources with little thought about the consequences. But you said that looking back, you now see that at least for the African American community, sustainability was something that you lived and you understood. You wasted little, you recycled everything, and you understood the trade-offs in your lives. Livelihood and economy on the one hand, and the environment and health on the other. So as you know, Goal 5 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is gender equality. Do you believe that we can achieve SDG Goal 5, gender equality, and SDG Goal 3, good health and well-being by 2030? And if so, what role should women of color in STEM play in ensuring a sustainable planet?
Carol, I'm glad that you asked that question. I actually had the chair of the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development ask me to come and give a presentation on the science and technology aspects that related to Goal 5. And I was able to say to him, it's not just about maternal health, it's often situated like that, but it's also about food security. It's about water. It's about sanitation. It's about all the other goals as well, because women's roles within the family and the community often embrace all of these other elements. They are the ones who give care. They are the ones who tend to the family. And so I hesitate to be a predictor of whether or not we're going to achieve those goals. Right now, I am concerned about our ability to achieve those goals. But I think that without having the goals and without focusing the science and technology on those goals, we will never even move toward achieving those goals. And that's why I think that we have to ask young women to pick up this mantle again, to arm themselves with the tools from science and technology and medicine and public health and what have you, so that we can, in fact, begin to move toward achieving the goals. It's going to mean that we have to take on the institutions. We're going to have to ask that young girls as well as young boys be educated in STEM. We're not just at the primary level, which is often the focus and was the focus of the Millennium Development Goals, that we just look at the primary level. We are talking about the fact that they are going to need to have education up to and through the tertiary level, higher education, so that they can become the agents of change that will allow us to reach not just Goal 3 and 5, but the rest of them as well.
It goes back to your comment at the beginning. This is a systemic issue that must be addressed at a systemic level.
Absolutely. And that means that governments, it means that institutions in community, it means that educational institutions, financial institutions, and all are going to have to understand how equity for women and girls is going to translate into sustainability for the world.
On behalf of the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative and the Smithsonian Institution writ large, thank you, Dr. Malcom, for your willingness to engage in good trouble, for writing your seminal paper in 1976, and for your work in the field of advancing women of color and all people in science. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, Ruki and Carol. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the Q&A. I have a few questions from our viewers. The first one is, Ruki and Carol, can you tell us a bit about how you got into the field of museum education? How do you combat systemic racism and sexism in the sciences in your own work?
Ruki?
That's a big question, Jen. If I could answer in one word, it would be persistence. I'm an immigrant. I left India not only to challenge the path that was pre-assigned to me, but also because in my 20s, I didn't have the confidence and felt completely ill-equipped to tackle really large systemic issues of sexism, ageism, racism. And so my path to the United States was not an easy one, but drive, grit, good mentors, and the kindness of strangers have really helped me get to where I am. I actually applied for internships at museums right after graduate school, including to the Smithsonian, and didn't get it. But after a career in design, a career in higher education, I think I finally joined enough dots to be in the field of museum education. But all I have to say is sometimes the long and windy paths have the best views. So I don't have any regrets for all the experience I've collected along the way, but I'm sure I'm happy to be here at this point. Carol, I'd love to hear your start.
So it's always interesting to reflect on your story as to how you got where you are. And I agree with you, Ruki, that most of us, if we re-examine our path, it's a very windy one. But there's also always the same thing that's at the heart of driving you and your passion. When I was in college, I lived in a very poor area within the inner city of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania in the US. And we didn't have schools in our neighborhood. And as a result, going off to college was not something that was expected. But when I was fortunate enough to get into a local college, the University of Pittsburgh, my first work-study program job was at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. And, I relied on places where you didn't have to necessarily pay to get in. So it was Carnegie Library or the Carnegie Museums, and fell in love with just the place where you walk in and you can learn in these kind of informal, unfacilitated ways. And while my path took me into teaching, because I loved learning, and I also saw education as something that was a pathway to financial security and job security, I realized that there was something that drove me back to museums. And so in 1991, I came back to museums in my first job at the Smithsonian. And, but my work, as you know, is specifically around K through 12 education. And we recognize that what happens in classrooms really does make a difference in terms of addressing racism and sexism. If you have teachers in your classroom who don't look like you, it's very hard for you to see yourself in others. And so we try to address the problem, as Dr. Malcom said, systemically. So how do you bring more teachers of color into the science classroom?
Wonderful. How are museums taking their role in combating systemic racism and sexism seriously today? How have they done so in the past? And what role do educators have to play in helping museums address these issues?
Also a great question, Jen. I would say, I think the first step is, of course, awareness, even understanding that some of these problems are systemic, and to really learn more about them. I think as museums and centers, we often come into communities as an expert, but not only do we support learning, I think it's important for us to be humble about doing some learning ourselves. Museums are places where people come to learn. So for us to do that, I think we need to think about education, demonstrate that we're capable of learning. And in this environment, the educator plays such a vital role as connector, convener, and facilitator. But the fact that more museums are leaning heavily into their public service role through education, I think is encouraging and is probably, I think, a positive step towards combating systemic racism and sexism.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, one of the important roles that museums play is that they serve their communities. So if you go back to Dr. Malcolm's response to her question to Katrina, who works at the Anacostia Community Museum, community work matters, and museums have to reach out to their communities. Now, that's one thing when you are in a museum that serves a local community, but when you're in a museum or a set of museums like the Smithsonian that have a massive community across the nation, we have to make certain that the work that we do also reaches into communities across the US. And we do that. And it's really important for us to make certain that as educators, we are not only educating people who walk through the door, but we're also educating people by bringing the Smithsonian's content, research collections directly to them and working with them through the ways that they learn, either through their schools or through their local museums, our affiliate museums and other museums, or other community organizations have partnerships with groups all across the nation who serve people directly in their communities. And I think that helps to address this issue of equity. If we want young girls to see themselves as future scientists, technologists, engineers, mathematicians, we have to do a better job of meeting people where they are. And I think the Smithsonian, with collaborators like Dr. Malcom, are able to do that.
Wonderful. One last question for both of you. What does the Smithsonian see as its role in participating in this work? And does the Smithsonian collaborate with AAAS on this work at all?
I think the Smithsonian has a really vital role to play. We are seen as a trusted source. It's where people come to us to learn more, to help build their awareness. We also have the capacity to convene and to create a platform for people to engage in active conversation, to ask important questions, and to lean on all of the research and expertise that we have to really learn more and advance these important conversations. But I think Carol could speak more about how much we collaborate with various agencies to really help make some of this possible.
Yeah, one of the reasons Ruki and I and Katrina were fortunate enough to host Dr. Malcom on this panel is because of our relationship with AAAS, and which goes back a long time. Our previous Assistant Secretary of Education and Access, Claudine Brown, Dr. Claudine Brown, she was dear friends with Dr. Malcom. They've had a long relationship with each other, and the two institutions have as well. And so, as Ruki said, one of the reasons we are very fortunate in our ability to convene and to catalyze critical conversations around issues like race and sexism in science is because we have those relationships. So we feel very fortunate that a quick email to Dr. Malcom, to Shirley, meant a quick reply of an absolute yes. And she was very happy to contribute to the American Women's History Initiative and this symposium because of our relationship. They also, AAAS has what's called Project 2061, which goes back for years, in which they have also worked to advance science education by working directly with schools, as the Smithsonian Science Education Center and other organizations within the Smithsonian do. So we have a very similar mission of sharing knowledge with the world, either through publications or sharing knowledge with the world through schools. And science education and trying to create a more equitable access to science education is part of both organizations' efforts.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us this afternoon. It's been truly lovely to have you here with us. And that's it for the day, everyone. Thank you so much for spending a few hours with us this afternoon. We hope you found the sessions illuminating and exciting. You can join us right back here tomorrow, same time, same place, for sessions focused on women leaders in biology. Have a great evening.